What is going on right now? So if you guys have been on YouTube in the gaming sphere for the last few weeks, it's very likely that you've seen a lot of backlash and anger toward Nintendo. And there's a few different reasons for this, and it's not exactly something that's new with Nintendo. People have been accusing Nintendo of not supporting their communities and having corporate greed for years, and just each little thing piling on top of each other. For example, people don't like their online service, or some people say that their release of the Mario 3D Collection Pack was a ripoff. There've been little small things like this piling up over the years. But in the last few weeks, things have just exploded. So what's going on? A few weeks ago, the Melee community was organizing one of their biggest tournaments called Bighouse. This is a huge deal for Melee players, and it's something that people were really bummed out about because you couldn't really go with COVID going on. But not too long ago, one of the people within the Melee community developed his own version of the game that allowed for in-game online matchmaking. And the connection for the online matches was actually incredible, which is the first for Smash games. So it's been a really big deal in the Melee community. And so with COVID in full swing once again and Bighouse coming up, the Melee community was actually super excited because they had a way to participate in this big tournament they've been looking forward to. And then they received a cease and desist notice from Nintendo. The reason that Nintendo sided for shutting this down seems fairly straightforward. They were saying that they didn't want this online matchmaking to continue because it likely had to run off of copies of Melee that were illegally obtained, which I've seen a lot of people online or in the Melee community saying, no, we get all of our copies legally, but being honest, that hasn't been my experience with what I've seen. That being said, it doesn't change too much of the situation. Nintendo was saying that they didn't like that they couldn't verify where these downloads were coming from, and they also didn't like that it was a modded version of the game. And so they shut down the tournament. Shortly after that, the hashtag #FreeMelee started trending, and a lot of people in the Melee community and the greater Smash community were really upset. This just adds to a long chain of Nintendo frequently knocking down their Smash community. But shortly after this, in the Splatoon community, there was another big Splatoon event coming up. And a few of the teams within that tournament took the name Free Melee or other related things for their teams. And as a result of this, the stream for the tournament was shut down. Just for choosing names in solidarity with Melee, they weren't really allowed to continue streaming. At least from all available evidence, that's what we can assume. We haven't gotten a statement from Nintendo, and I think that's important to note. But this all just flies in the face of Smash fans and Nintendo fans in general. If you're familiar with the history of Smash or Melee at all, you'll know that it's always been an uphill battle to get Melee to exist as a competitive game. It started as a grassroots thing in people's garages and eventually grew despite all odds, with people traveling across the country and raising money to finally be able to compete. In fact, for Melee's first appearance at EVO, they had to win a donation charity drive challenge, and they were able to just beat out Skullgirls with over $100,000 raised for charity. And after all of that, Melee was finally able to compete at EVO, but they still weren't exactly officially sanctioned by Nintendo. And you'd think after all this time that Nintendo would give a bit more saving grace to the Melee community, especially with things like their donation attempts in the past. But we've also seen Nintendo not show a ton of support to fans raising charity money with their stuff. Recently, there was a person on Etsy who was creating custom Joy-Con skins in support of a creator named Etika who passed away last year after losing a battle with mental illness. This person decided to create these Joy-Cons in order to honor this creator that meant so much to people. And he wasn't even keeping the proceeds for himself, but he was giving them directly to a charity called NAMI, which is the nation's largest grassroots organization to help people with mental illness, which is what Etika was suffering from before he passed away last year. And they sent this person a cease and desist, telling them that they needed to stop selling their product, which, first off, this guy wasn't even selling Joy-Cons himself, he was just painting pre-existing Nintendo Joy-Cons. But assuming they have an issue with that, it doesn't even seem like their scrutiny is fairly applied. There are people all over Etsy or Redbubble or many places online doing really similar stuff, and they're not even putting their proceeds towards a good thing, but keeping the profits for themselves, which is totally fine for a business, but it just feels bad that Nintendo is taking down the charity drive rather than focusing on all these other things. When you look at other companies, a lot of them show a lot more support to their communities for fan creations or things of that sort, but Nintendo has always had a bit of a dodgy history with this. Whether it's shutting down Pokemon games or Smash mods or Project M, which is one of my favorite Smash mods of all time, probably my favorite Smash game, it's just always felt like they want their fans to enjoy their content, but they don't want them to do anything with it. it. So why is it like this? I see a lot of people expressing hatred toward Nintendo right now, and I understand it, to be honest, but I don't think that Nintendo is just sitting back there in their evil chair stroking an evil cat while doing a maniacal laugh. I don't know. I feel like there's got to be another reason. And I think we can get some light shown on the topic if we look back at Nintendo's history and how they got to where they were. In 1983, there was a huge crash in the video game market after a bunch of companies started putting out really crappy Atari games and oversaturating the video game market so much that it went from a multi-billion-dollar industry to only being worth a few $100,000 in 1 year. There were so many crappy games being put out at this time. Heck, Quaker Oats made a video game. If that's not bizarre, I don't know what is. And this all culminated with what is widely considered the worst video game of all time, Steven Spielberg's E.T. for the Atari. The reception to this game was so awful that it really just tanked the market, and a lot of people were done with video games as a genre. This crash, though, didn't carry over to Japan, and Nintendo, seeing a new opening in the market, sent off their Famicom to the United States. They tried really hard to not even make it seem like a video game console. If you look at a lot of their marketing, we get a bunch of really weird Nintendo commercials that don't focus on the game at all, but rather focus on like weird raps or something about the game. They also didn't make it any fun bright colors, but made it this dull gray color, and they called it an entertainment system instead of a video game console. They tried really hard to separate themselves from the video game genre. And once people started buying their systems, they noticed that the quality of all the Nintendo games were really good. Nintendo wasn't allowing all of these third-party developers to put their really bad games on the system, so people started to associate Nintendo with high-quality games. This continued on over the years, with Nintendo consistently putting out really good first-party games, and being really stingy with who was allowed to create third-party games. This is one of the things that helped save the video game industry and help create some of the best games of all time. But fast forward nearly 40 years and the scene is just different. There's a ton of good games, there's a ton of third-party developers, and so while I understand their iron grip on keeping their games their own and not wanting people to modify it because it does go back to their history, it just doesn't seem necessary anymore. It seems like they're clamping down on the video game industry and their fans just because they can. There's no threat to them, there's no threat to losing all the sales of Melee that probably don't exist, and there's probably not any real threat to their IP. People think that Nintendo is just this huge greed monger looking for money at every corner. And while every company does need money to function, I'm not gonna blame any company for seeking out money. What Nintendo seems to forget is that money is not the only asset for a company. You need customer relations, you need your fans to love you. It's something that Nintendo has never really done well. And it's something that the fan bases are continually losing hope that they will do well. And with this whole free Melee thing happening right in the middle of a pandemic, or shutting down support for one of the top creators of Smash, trying to raise money for charity, it all just feels like Nintendo is spitting in our faces. Even if Nintendo didn't want to allow its fans to do it, they could at least recognize these projects and take it on themselves. I'm sure the Melee community would love it if Nintendo put out something similar. And I'm sure the creator of those joycons would love it if Nintendo pushed for that same initiative, but they don't. They just shut down project after project and it makes it feel like they don't care. So I understand where all this hate is coming from, and I hope you do too. I don't personally see Nintendo as this big, evil corporate entity, but rather I see them just not understanding their fan base and trying to get by in the way that they used to get by, which is having good control over their games, but they're stuck in an industry that's evolving faster than they are, and it leaves them seeming greedy, out of touch, and uncaring. So that's the scoop on what's going on. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's a bit heavier of a topic than I like to typically cover. If you want to support that charity that the Joy-Cons were going toward, I'm going to put a link to it in the description. And until next time, free Melee.